they teach you how to speak so that other people will listen to you. I'm thinking, wait a second, they need to teach you how to listen so that other people will talk to you.
What can we learn from youth and youth workers? How can we support each other and become a better version of ourselves? This is the Source of Growth podcast, created by a Hungarian NGO, the Academy of Experience. I am Arpad Barnai, the host of the podcast. In this episode, our guest was Haesun Moon, who is a communication scientist, researcher, coach, educator, and a great storyteller. In the first part of our conversation, we explored how we can become better at communicating, how her understanding changed about learning to communicate, and she shares a tool she developed that can help us navigate better in our conversations. I really recommend her work for anyone who wants to have better conversations, not only in our professional but in our personal lives as well. Welcome, Haesun. It is great to have you as our guest. Let me tell you why. If you have a look at the map, at least in Europe, of youth work, coaching has become a part of it. Coaching kind of conversations, coaching influenced any kind of interaction. I'm a youth worker. I'm a football coach, or I just work with youngsters. I'm not ICF coach, but I want to communicate better. So how to learn that? How to take more responsibility for our conversations? I think it's a big topic for a lot of people, for even parents too. So that's one context. And the other thing is that how to teach this is also one of your topics. And I want to broaden it because you have some very, very inspiring thoughts on dialogue and conversation and about curating better stories. So that's why I'm so happy that you're here.
Wow, thank you.
If I look at who you are, if I just have a look at your LinkedIn profile, for example, I see that communication scientist.
It sounds pretty serious, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it's very serious. University, coaching center. So would you tell how you describe what you do?
So what I do is actually rather simple. Getting people to have more conversation and have them better. So that's what I am interested in. That's what I research. That's what I practice. And I think that's what I actually teach people to do actually more and better.
It sounds wonderful and could sound mysterious. What does it mean and how did you end up there? What would you say about this, like your path towards this vocation that you're now doing?
I think for me, how I actually ended up here has several, I guess, milestones. You know, I studied in my undergrad, I did psychology, I did religious studies, and I did different things. I did life science. So I kind of like really wanted to know stuff. After university, I started working as a manager for group homes for about 7 years, 8 years.
Wow.
And I mean, they taught me so much about how to communicate. Because often when we see people with developmental disability, we think, well, they don't communicate. I mean, hello, they do. We don't understand. That's what's happening. So, you know, I had this one lady I remember, and she didn't speak the way they would understand. She was blind and she was deaf. She had to wear special diapers and like a helmet because she would bang her head against the wall. They actually called her behavioral because she has this behaviors that is harmful. And one day I realized that she was banging her head against the wall so much. And I'm like, okay, hello, people. She's trying to communicate here. What is she communicating? And we just didn't know. We gave her food. We gave her, nothing worked. And she had no teeth. So we had to, blend everything, and she had to drink it. And she was banging her head, and we're like, this is so, what do you want? And we didn't know what she wanted. Clearly, she was communicating. We didn't understand. And we took her to a hospital just to check out if everything is okay. And for the first time, they did some x-ray of her mouth area because she kept on doing something with her mouth. Mind you, she got no teeth. Okay.
Yeah.
X-ray shows that she actually had wisdom teeth growing, and it was painful for her. So, from that experience, RP, I realized that people are always communicating, and we don't always hear it nor understand it. So I think that is really the foundation of my training and curiosity and communication. And when we see kids, we may think the same way. We're communicating in the way that we understand. It's like, hello, since when the world revolve around you? So anyway, that's the basis actually of learning about communication.
Mhm.
And if you want to communicate, you will.
Mhm.
And I think the question is how often and can we have them better?
Mhm.
So that's the story that probably I don't really talk about because like a long time ago and really when I learned to communicate.
Wow, there are these everyday interactions which can teach us a lot. You teach people also this. You learn yourself and you teach. If we can call that teaching, I don't know how you call it. So that's one part of the question. And the other part of the question is like, how can we learn to communicate and help each other learn? Because some of it is in the textbook, like, oh, okay, communication works like this. Or I can have some inspiration coming from people, be it written or spoken. And at the same time, life is super complex and doesn't stick to the rules.
You know, I can tell you all the challenges that I'm actually having with that very topic, you know, because the fact that I am doing lectures and I'm sharing this doesn't mean that I practice it 100% in my life. So I can
Mhm.
tell you all those moments too. That I have two nephews living with me, and they're age 11 and 14. There are some things that I am actually doing and also really reflect on in terms of my interactions with them. There are many examples like that, but it just happened this week because Jeremy, the 14-year-old, he's quite timid. He's a little bit shy. His confidence is kind of low. So what he usually does is if somebody's being rude to him, if somebody is like borderline bullying him, he will just take it. And he will just take it. He's like, oh, well, okay. So that's what I've been trying to tell him that, Jeremy, like, let's work on the boundaries. I said, Jeremy, if somebody's making you uncomfortable, you need to let them know that, what you're doing is making me uncomfortable and it's not okay. So I'm trying to teach him this phrase, it's not okay. So we've been working on it for like a few months now. And especially I told him that, hey, if somebody's rude to you, don't take it. Let them know that it's not okay. So this is the message, right? And just the other day, Nathan, 11-year-old, Jeremy's younger brother, got in huge trouble from me for lying. That's something that really I get so upset in like a millisecond. It's like, and I knew in my head, calm down, we can have this conversation better. But I'm like, and then I was like, how could you lie to me? And I was like, going at Nathan, it's like, how could you lie to me? I'm your family and you're lying to me and blah, blah, blah. And then, I noticed that Jeremy was actually there too. And I can see that he was getting uncomfortable because I am raising my voice. And then at one point, Jeremy just closed his eyes and he opened his eyes and he looked at me and he said, excuse me, Auntie, in the middle of my blah. Right? Jeremy says, excuse me, Auntie. I said, what? And Jeremy says, I think you're being too harsh and it's not okay. He stopped me in the middle of my rage and he says, I think you're being too harsh and it's not okay. And I think that's when I stopped and I thought, oh my gosh, you're learning this. And then I stopped and I was like, Jeremy, thank you. And I was just so moved. And I said, Jeremy, you make me so happy that you actually do this. And I just looked at him. I said, Jeremy, what do you suggest that I do right now? Because what I want to do is I want to teach Nathan it's not okay to lie. And Jeremy is thinking, and in front of Nathan, we are talking about it. And Jeremy says, well, he usually doesn't lie about things. And I'm like, true. Shame on me, right? And that's true. And Jeremy says, well, if that's what you want him to learn, why don't you say that and give him just another chance? And I just turned around to Nathan. I said, you know what, Nathan? I need to apologize for being too harsh. And I think your brother is standing up for you. And I think I'm going to take his his suggestion. So would that work for you? And he's like, yes. And he's crying. And that just happened on Tuesday. And today's Friday. It's like, it's an ongoing thing that, you never arrive there because interaction is an ongoing. So I am growing, they're growing, I think. And when people meet in their growth chart, it's kind of like those interactions happen. Anyway, that's something that I am actually learning, that learning doesn't happen all of a sudden. Somehow there's a gradual thing, then there's a chance for you to get it. So I think that's what I see that they do. And I think that's the main reason why when I teach this, when I share this, I think my job is to create a condition where people are gradually really experiencing it in many different ways. So when the time comes, they're like, oh, that's what it is. I think those moments are so precious.
And how do you do that?
How do I do that is, I think, especially when I teach, adults, like classes that where adults actually come, teaching, learning, sharing, I use them kind of like all interchangeably. But I think what I do mostly is create a condition where people are more likely to discover their progress. Especially this class that I'm teaching right now, we have two people who are like trained, licensed psychotherapists. And we have somebody like who's a manager at a bank who has never heard of like therapy or coaching, like never done it, never been part of it. So when we have mixed group like that, and some people believe that they know what they're doing, and some people believe that they have no idea. And then all we have to do is put them in a position where they will be doing their own benchmarking. So they do what they think they know today. And their task is very simple. We don't ask them to now coach each other. We just say, have a conversation and try to be useful, as well as you think. Right? And it's a very simple instruction. Have a conversation, record it, have a conversation and try your best to be useful to the other person. And then we just repeat that almost every class. They have 15-minute conversation with somebody else and they're trying to be useful. And then after 6-7 weeks, we simply look at their progress and say, hey, now looking back on your baseline, what do you see that you're trying to do but was not actually useful that now you know how to do? And that conversation, RP, is just so life-giving. Because when they realize that they have progressed and somebody is actually pointing at the fact that, look, your progress, I think that's really important that we do that. As educators, we take on that role rather than like, this is what you need to learn, memorize it.
Why it's really inspiring all the time when I hear you speak about how you approach learning of communicating better is that when I started to learn more consciously about communicating, it was when I worked in a foster home. And later on also I went to some trainings, shorter ones, and I thought like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I just had my traditions of speaking that I brought from home. So that's how I do. And then I realized sometimes, it's not really, doesn't really lead where I want to end up. And also, this was the smaller part. The bigger part was that I started to notice that there are situations or conversations that I'm not trained for or that I should avoid. Like, okay, this is somehow therapy kind of stuff or topic. Okay, let's not go there. Or this should really be handled by some professional. Okay, but who am I? Where are my competencies? I wanted to be sure that I'm doing well. So I went to these trainings and they helped me a lot. And still I had this notion that conversation is a kind of sequence or I should learn questions, like what are the right questions. And I remember getting the question cards. Oh, this is a great question. So which comes after which? And it's not that questions are not good. They are part of a conversation. But after a while, I went on from this first approach, and I find it really interesting, your journey with this teaching? Because I heard that you also started with question cards and you also have them with you. So
I have them right in front of me right now.
tell me about this. Like, what do you teach? How do you teach?
What do I teach and how do I teach is, I guess, whether you're doing coaching, therapy, parenting, teaching, whatever you do, I think any interaction that we are engaging in, they usually start with listening. I mean, there's a popular saying, especially in North America, in communication class. I really wondered why more than like 85% of communication classes, they teach you how to speak so that other people will listen to you. Like leadership training you go to, they teach you how to speak so that they will, other people will listen to you. I'm thinking, wait a second, they need to teach you how to listen so that other people will talk to you. It's a very simple shift. But like when you look at communication book, they teach you skills to how to construct a message and all those things, but it's more of how do you listen so that they will speak to you, especially as a parent, as a teacher, and how do you listen in a way that they're more likely to talk to you. So I think that became a very important part of my training, where we are actually starting like 1/3 of the class right in the beginning. We don't even teach a single question actually in class. We start with listening. And simply, there is one question, and we say, what did you hear the client say that they might want? And that's just what they're listening with. And simply listening for what did you hear the client say that they might want? And if you say that enough, then they start to now listen for that. And now, in that one question that we teach, there's a lot in it. One is, what am I actually hearing that they say? Meaning, what are some of the words that they're using? And then, second part is that they might want. We didn't say what they want, but it's they might want. For example, suppose a miracle happens and this and that, and they say, well, I would win the lottery. Popular example, isn't it? Well, winning the lottery is not what they want, but maybe it's what they might want. Because, okay, suppose you win the lottery, then what? Well, then I can give money to my kids. Okay, that's what you want. And also, suppose that, well, then my kids will respect me more. Okay, that's what you want, and also what you might want. So suppose your kids respect you more, and what difference would you notice? Well, they will come for dinner more often. Now you're really getting to what they might want, what they might want. And, sometimes we call it's the mighty might. Simply listen for that. So listening is the biggest part of it, because I think I started with the questions and they helped for a little bit. What's interesting is I use this analogy. So I love golf. And I told a story where a golfer died and went to, whether it's heaven and hell, we don't know yet. But golfer died and opened his eyes. And he is in this beautiful golf course. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, maybe this is heaven. And there's just like a lovely companion who's like approaching him. And they say, well, good day, good day. And the golfer is like, my goodness, am I like, is this heaven? Because I died. And yeah, you sure died. And this is where you wake up to. And the golfer is ecstatic. And the companion actually passes him, like hands him this like beautiful like set of clubs. And it's like, here, this is yours. And this golfer is like, oh my gosh, I'm in heaven. And then the golfer said, would you play with me? And companion says, of course, that's why I'm here. So he is so excited, and he actually takes this like driver, and he's like, okay, let's play. And then he got he got ready, like he has like tea and everything, and he's like, where are the balls? And the companion says, you're in hell, you got everything, but you don't have a ball. Now I tell this story because I oftentimes think that having all the questions in your hands and going into a conversation not knowing how to listen is like waking up in that golf course without golf balls. So,
The crucial part.
and yeah, that's the crucial part for me. So we start with listening, and surprisingly, If they know how to listen by fourth week, each class is about 3 hours long. So after about 9 hours in class, they already start to ask things that sound more like solution focused textbook questions without having been taught that. Because they know by listening, they know where they want to take their conversation to. So it's fascinating to hear them like come up with their own way of asking. It's like, oh my gosh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. And I'm learning from them as they're constructing their own way of asking because they now know how to listen.
Wow. Well, thank you for this. I think this should be advertised, really. Like, question came when I was just listening to you that I have this experience when people come pay for a course, they want to get everything all out of it. Teach me, give me something. I can imagine if you say someone, okay, what I want to teach you is just listen, and you'll see. Might sound like, okay, my hands are empty. Come on, give me something. So how do you advertise this? How do you help them go with it?
Oh, wow. I love that you're asking this question. So here's what happens. I think I was reading the article that Harry Corman, I think Harry's part of it, Harry and Peter actually wrote, and they're looking at the calibration sequence. So calibration sequence, what we mean by that is kind of like how somebody actually introduces a new idea in a conversation. Like you need to both agree that, okay, I'm okay with that information. You got what I said, and you're like, yeah, okay, we can move on. So calibration or grounding is kind of like, one example I can give you is this. In conversations, you bring a lot of pieces of stuff. I bring a lot of pieces of stuff that we can build a house together. So we both bring like a bunch of bricks that we're going to build a house. But then without calibration, you are just stacking the bricks to build a house without gluing them together. I'll give you an example. If I say, so RP, one of the things that I do actually is, do you know this sports called pickleball?
No.
Okay. So then now I introduce this idea of pickleball. You're like, no, then I am going to now explain, or I'm going to actually make you understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I say, so RP, the sports golf?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I play golf.
Okay, then we agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very simple thing like this that happens, but it's ongoing process moment by moment. So what happens is when you're actually asking a miracle question, it's not the question that actually has the power, but it's everything else that the client and coach do together that really makes the question work. For example, when Insu says, so I'm going to ask you a strange question. And then you watch what client does. And client is like, okay. They agreed to it. And then sometimes Insu says, so you have good imagination? And then client's like, yeah, I guess so. Agreed to it. That's how you glued that together. So now you can build on it. So a lot of times when learners come and they're like expecting something, and right in the beginning, I say, well, this class, I hope that you came here so that it will be experiential for you. None of them say, no, I came here to get the information. So I said, well, this will be experiential for you. And people say, yeah, we love that. And I said, I do have some ideas of where it might go, but it will be really mostly run by your experience and questions and insights. And most of them, they agreed to it. And without that agreement, I cannot experiment with baseline and all those things. And even the baseline, people used to be terrified of filming themselves. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to record it. And then I changed my framing. And I used to say it this way. I said, hey, so for your final project, you will have to make a recording. And it's even better if it's video recording. Almost none of them did video recording when I say it like that. But now, right in the beginning, I just tell them, we are going to start with the video recording yourself. And this is going to be the best gift that you can give yourself later on. Nobody even questions about the video recording.
Hmm.
So once I have their agreement, we can do anything in class. Some people come, especially like organizations, banks, they come and where's the agenda?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think it really is what you agree to do together in the session that makes a difference. You know, it's interesting because sometimes when government comes and they're like, can you please come and deliver this to us? And you're supposed to give them the agenda PowerPoint 2 weeks prior. And we do. We have a template. It's like, here, what do you think? They're like, we love it. Sure. I show up and I don't use a PowerPoint. I just end up having conversations. And then I say, well, we'll send you the PowerPoint afterwards.
You reminded me to some conversations I had. Like some people were just talking about training, and they asked, okay, what visuals can you use? The first reaction was PowerPoint pictures, whatever. But then my thoughts were, humans are visuals. Like if you have a conversation and you can have a look at real stuff happening,
Mm.
that's a very strong visual. Also, you see real stuff. You're upgrading from the agenda. How you improved your way of teaching. In some of your videos, you say you have these apology classes. I really love that idea of admitting that, yes, I'm improving. Tell me about that. Do you still have them, or what's
Yes.
that?
So I mean, my way of learning is by sharing it with somebody. So the very first day I walk into that wrong class where I was supposed to be in organizational development class, and it happened to be actual title was brief counseling strategies, and the professor was primarily talking about a solution focused brief therapy using Insu and Peter's book as interviewing for solutions as the textbook. So I ended up in that class with a bunch of psychotherapy students, and I'm thinking, what the heck is this? So I started to teach right after the class. I took one class and I started to teach. I started to host community sessions. I was a professor teaching psychology to like college students and so on. So I already knew how to kind of teach the way that I did. So I would actually host community classes and teach them the skills, teach them techniques. Even better, we actually taught them questions. So it's like 5 questions to change your life. And we were doing that for a long time, actually, RP. And one day, Peter DeYoung, actually, it was Peter DeYoung who came and he was looking at my master class. We had about 18 students, I believe. You know, master class, by the way, is so misunderstood. And I think I wrote about it somewhere that master class is where people think the master shows up and they teach you something. That's an absurd idea. I don't know where they get this idea from because master class comes from like music. In music, it came from like Franz Liszt, who held master classes to make like teaching more efficient. So the whole point of masterclass was actually students come and they show and people give feedback. So, you know, that's what I mean by masterclass, students showing their own coaching skills, and then we give them appreciative feedback. And then that masterclass was interesting because they're so well trained, IB. It was so interesting. And after that, Peter DeYoung and I, we were just walking back to the hotel, and Peter said, so you're a good teacher. I said, thank you. And I was like, thank you, Peter. What makes you say that? And he says, because all your students are like, pretty much they sound the same. And I thought it was a compliment. And I said, hey, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Peter said, almost all of them all started with best hopes. Then they moved to suppose that happens and tomorrow, what would you do? And the whole formula that I actually learned from different sources. And especially at the time, I was really influenced by love Chris Iverson and his team and their work. So I was kind of like drilling them with those
Mm-hmm.
formula. I took it as formula, right? And then everyone ended with like, so what's your next step? So I'm like, yeah, that's the formula. And he's like, okay, okay. And Peter says, you're a very good teacher. And I thought about it because I think students memorized what to say, but they weren't thinking and responding to what the client has just said. So my class of 18 sounding exactly the same, became a huge problem for me. The way that we have this model called solution focused is by listening to our clients. I mean, if Insu didn't listen to the client, we don't have the miracle question because it came from the client. If Steve doesn't listen to the client, then we may not have scaling question because that also was introduced by this client. I thought, why are we now stop kind of listening and then teach them the skills that we actually learned from just really watching our clients? So, we were talking about how do we make our teaching congruent with the model itself. And I think Jonas Wells also said, somehow we learned how to, we started to listen. So we have this way of working with, people. Somehow we have that as now a formula and started teaching it. And Jonas said, at the time when we stopped learning and started teaching is when we kind of like lost it. So how do we get back to the learning stance? How do we teach it in a way that we discovered it? So that means, how do we get our students to listen to the client and discover for themselves what seems to be useful and what happens here? How do you know that that was useful? And I think that was really a huge milestone in thinking about teaching this differently.
Solution focused people might be pretty interested in what you say, and I really believe that not only solution focused practitioners listen to this conversation, but people who just want to have better conversations. What I heard from you is a shift from first learning about conversations, going to the first class. Okay, let's do this, and you get really enthusiastic, and that's a good sign that they did such a good job that you felt confident enough to go with it, so you started. And then for a while you use more the questions, so it sounded like it's a sequence of question sentences. That's the structure of a conversations, and there's a good way of having them and a bad way of having them, and it's more like a rigid structure. For me, when I think about myself starting to learn, it looks like a structure that could be used for any kind of conversation, and it's weird looking back, but then it was useful to start with. And I moved towards, okay, no, it's not these just the questions, but it's more competencies. Professionals agree on what's a good, competent behavior of person leading a conversation. And what I hear from you is that you don't even do that.
Oops.
It sounds like that you really hand the responsibility for personal growth to the learner, and you record a conversation that you call the baseline, and they can compare their growth to their starting conversation and see the differences they find useful. You don't refer to any competencies, or like just to put this in picture, like what's your state?
I mean, whether you're a teacher or coach or counselor or whatever, I think we somehow know how to be useful. And I think we also try to be useful. So making into a competency as, you are motivated or willing to be like empathetic, it's a little bit absurd because we already know how to do that. And to make it even worse, competencies. So here's 10 competencies or something. You're like teaching your class based on the competencies, and in 3 years, we changed our competencies. It's like, what are you doing? Because competencies are just I guess some construct that people sort of categorize into, yeah, this is what we see in good coaches. But what happens is we are already doing that. RP, as a parent, as a coach, as a teacher, you already know how to do certain things to be useful to them. And I think what we do in our training is making it a little bit more visible for you to notice that what you're already doing that's working. And not only that, maybe if there's a little tiny shift that we can kind of introduce so that you can try out, that becomes a very powerful tool. So a couple of examples come to my mind, RP. When my nephew Jeremy was grade 2, and I had to like drop off winter boots for him. So I went to his school and I'm passing by his classroom, and they had this classroom door a little bit propped open so I could hear what was going on. And as I'm just dropping off these winter boots, I could hear like the teacher, it was math class, and the teacher says, so how do you go to 9 from 3? And I'm thinking, that's an interesting way of teaching. How do you get to a 9 from 3? You're right now, you're at 3. How do you get to a 9? And then I think Jeremy put up his hand because the teacher's like, okay, Jeremy. And I'm like, yes. And Jeremy goes, well, add 5. I'm like, oh my gosh. 3 add 5 is freaking 8. And I'm like standing outside is like so embarrassing, right? And I was expecting the teacher to say wrong, but the teacher said, oh, okay, so add 5. And I can hear her actually write on the board. And she goes, what else?
Come on.
And I'm thinking, what did you say? And then there's another kid who goes, add 2. I'm like, oh, this idiot. And then this teacher's like, okay, let's see. And then she was writing something and she's like, oh, we just went, oopsie daisy. She says, we just went over the 9. And what do we do? What do we do? And all the kids were like, oh, -1, -1. Eventually they got to a 9. I was standing outside of the classroom in tears because she made every answer the correct answer. That's what we are talking about. It's not a big thing that we're teaching people to do, but a very simple shift in your perspective that kids, people, they're doing something, and usually it's in the right direction. And our job is to believe that they're doing something in the direction that they want. And really our job is to listen for it and say, hey, what else are you doing? What else can we do? And that's one example that I learned from just grade 2 class, just standing outside. And the way that we do that is, I think out of some struggles that I had about how do we teach in a way that every answer is correct, came this idea of, can we actually provide some heuristics? Heuristic as in kind of like a tool, learning tool that you can have in your hand, right? So could we actually have something like that? And that was a big struggle for a couple of years. And I had some models that was a little bit complicated. And it's like, oh, that doesn't work. I had this CAP model, different ways of like, okay, how do I simplify it? And then one day I was in a conversation with one of the learners. We didn't speak the same language. It had to be translated. And in that translation, we both had thinking space, and also we are trying to understand each other. Like, I don't understand what you're saying, and he didn't know what I was saying. And out of that interaction came this idea. Okay, it's kind of like that when you're listening to somebody, they're telling you something from their past. And he's like, yeah, 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 yeah. And I said, and there's also telling you something from the future. He's like, yeah, 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 I can see that. I can see that. I said, okay. So we agreed on it. So we have this line, past to future. And then I said, so which one do you think we talk about in coaching? And I was expecting, based on the textbook, that future oriented, right? And then the guy actually looks at me and he's like, well, both. I'm like, actually, that's true. That's true. Okay. And I said, okay. And also, clients tell us about something that they really want. And he's like, yeah, 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 they do, they do. And I said, also, they tell us something about something that doesn't work. And they're like, yeah, maybe that's why they come for coaching. And I said, so which one do you think we focus on in coaching? And he's thinking about, he's like, well, I was expecting RP. Of course, we talk about what we want, but he's like, well, we talk about both. So we actually ended up having some conversation translated, and I had a huge aha moment from that conversation that we put them together, and now we have this very simple heuristic that actually makes it simpler for people to watch their own work. When they're watching their own tape, it doesn't have to be a coaching tape, just interaction tape. And they can look at their conversation and map it. And that's the visual thing that you're talking about. We gave people visuals to have in their mind. Simple map. Left to right is past to future. Top to bottom is positive content and negative content of their life.
And what do you mean by positive? Sorry, just adding there. It can be misunderstood. That's why I'm just adding there.
Yeah, so positive content and negative content are the terms that I actually learned from microanalysis, which is a research tool that changed my life anyway. Microanalysis of face-to-face dialogue. They actually have positive content of client's life, something like maybe thoughts, feelings, interactions, experiences that people really like or would like to see increase in their life. In a way, positive, negative feels like value judgment, but it's simply something that they want is positive, and something that they don't want is negative.
Hmm.
So it's a very simple model. And then once you have that, you have 4 areas on that map. So like something that they want to see happen more in the future becomes their hopeful or preferred future. And in this model, we call it quadrant 1. And quadrant 2 is things that happened in the past that you really enjoyed, that you cherish, that you would love to see that happen again, actually. And that's called resourceful past, which is quadrant 2. And quadrant 3 is sort of like a bottom left, which is things that happened in the past that really you really didn't like, and you would not like to see it happen again, like experiences, conversations, feelings, and all that stuff that that person doesn't want. And that's quadrant 3, which is troubled past. And then the last quadrant, which is kind of like lower right, is when people are worried about what might happen in the future. And we usually, a lot of us live in like regretful past and sort of fears of the future. And that's called fearful or dreaded future. And this is a very simple map. It took me 2 minutes to tell you about it.
Mhm.
So a lot of times you can even like take out a napkin and draw it and here, take it. And sometimes I use it with teams and say, hey, just watch your conversation and like see if you can map the content of your meeting. And people just do that. They just kind of do that in their notebook and they come back. It's like, my goodness, all of them are talking about quadrant 3 or 4. And they're like, how do we actually, shift this conversation so that we are actually celebrating what we have done really well and where we want to go? So I think in a way, the quadrant becomes a very simple learning tool where you can actually teach yourself because it makes you watch your language.
What the other person, what the client wants more of or less of. So it's
Mhm.
not me deciding, but really starting to listen for this. And if I think about what might a parent or a youth worker want, is that,
Mhm.
yeah, I know what's good for the child or the adolescent. This is a really good training tool also to switch this modality of listening. That I'm not scanning for the good things that I think are good happening,
Mhm.
not that
Mhm.
checklist only, but
Mhm.
really switching. Okay, but what does she want more of? So what's her reality? And the other thing is
Mhm.
that it's really respectful in a way that it's not a diagnostic tool. It's
Mhm.
something that can be shared with people, and not only shared but helps them see. When I meet with any professional or parent who encounters with youngsters who might get in trouble, teenagers mostly, then
Mhm.
there are some tough topics, tough issues, maybe addiction or
Mhm.
suicide, a lot of things. These are important stuff. I want my kids safe. I
Mhm.
want to talk about anything. You can tell about anything, but let's not go there. Let's handle these topics carefully because I might do harm. So what I
Mhm.
hear from these people that they feel really responsible not to touch anything that can cause harm or
Mhm.
handle topics and issues well. Sometimes I hear people talking about that if professional conversations are in question, that coaches talk about future and what's about the past is more therapy.
Mhm.
And your story about this quadrant actually reveals that we talk a lot about the past and the future. So could you tell about how do you teach or how do you handle these kind of situations when people just talk about stuff, sometimes talk about bad stuff? How do you help these learners to navigate well? How do you use this quadrant with this?
When I invite the learners to simply hold one question in mind, what do you hear that they might want? Quadrant 3 is a very important indicator of what they might want instead. Quadrant 4, which is a fearful future, it becomes such a great resource in terms of if somebody is very afraid of something, they can't stop thinking about it, right? So then oftentimes people come and say, I cannot think, I cannot stop thinking about it. I have graduate student, or somebody who applied to get into graduate school, and now she's waiting for the result, and she's like, oh my gosh, I can't stop thinking about it. So, for example, when somebody's talking about their fear and dread of the future, we have an option here. We have some different choices that we make. One is, wow, it sounds pretty dreadful, and they say yes. But if you say, well, that sounds pretty dreadful, and they say yes. And then if I simply say, so clearly you spend a lot of time thinking about this because this is important to you. Yeah, it is. Then I can really invite them to say, I mean, you must know a lot of things about this particular topic. So, what are you learning about thinking about these things? For example, a lot of times people with a phobia, for example, or people who are nervous about exam coming up or getting kicked out, and all this possibility that may happen. And I think when I talk to them about it, clearly you have thought about it for a long time. Yes, I have. So what ideas do you actually have about this? And often they actually tell me about it. And I, very small case, but I had a client who was just really afraid of rats. And she happened to live in an area, it was infested with the rats, and it was a serious phobia. And she said she cannot stop thinking about it. And I said, okay, so scale of 10 to 1, 10 is you think about rats and many other things about your life. And she works, so you think about your job, you think about your family, and there's a rat thought too, is 10. And 1 is I cannot think about anything else but the rats. And she said, oh, don't be silly. Of course I'm like, I don't know, 6. Oh, okay. So what helps for you to be at 6? Clearly, because rats is not what you always think about. There are many different ways of inviting our clients to look at certain things differently, slightly differently, because she actually thought I can't stop thinking about it too. Of course, there are other things I think about. Don't be silly. Right? So I think in a way, quadrant 3 and 4, they're really useful indicators of what clients might want. So if you avoid them, they're going to come back to it because they will feel that they are not heard. But there's a difference between acknowledging and exploring, right? So we may not explore, but we do acknowledge every single thing that they may mention in quadrant 3 or 4.
If I think about it, like I can imagine that you invite me as a learner to listen for what's important for a client. If I hear about the quadrant 3 and 4, things that they regret in the past or are afraid of, then I can acknowledge it. And still, if I decide to explore it a lot, then I'm not doing good service.
It comes down to, was it useful and was it necessary for the client?
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you found our work useful and inspiring, you can follow us by clicking on the links in the description. If you would like to support us, you can also do that by giving us feedback, recommending our work to others, or sending donations. As an NGO, we are grateful for any type of support. Take care, live well. We hope to see you again.